It started as a whisper, a barely there feeling I couldn't shake. Jenna, my wife of 7 years, had always been fiercely ambitious. She worked in marketing, a field that demanded constant travel. I admired her drive. It was one of the things I loved most about her. My own career as a freelance writer allowed me to work from home, supporting her in ways her hectic schedule often required. For a long time, we worked, not just as individuals, but as partners. We celebrated her career milestones together, basking in the shared glow of her success. But over the past year, something had shifted. At first, it was subtle. She smiled less when she walked through the door after a long trip. The stories of her adventures dwindled to surface-level summaries. Her texts became brief and devoid of the warmth that used to make my day. I wanted to believe it was just work stress, that the long hours were taking their toll. After all, her ambition was the cornerstone of our relationship, and I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But the feeling of unease grew. I'd catch her glancing at her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't share with me. She started taking calls in the other room, saying they were about work. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, as I finished an assignment early, I noticed her laptop on the dining table. Normally, Jenna took it everywhere. She claimed she needed it for her frequent client meetings, so leaving it behind was unusual. I stared at it, an internal battle raging. Trust was the foundation of our marriage. Snooping felt wrong, but the nagging doubts gnawed at me. Was I paranoid? Or was my gut trying to warn me of something I couldn't ignore? After minutes of hesitation, I opened it. My fingers trembled as I navigated through her files. Her email app was open, and a conversation caught my eye. The subject line read, "Last night was unforgettable." I clicked. The messages were explicit, dripping with intimacy and passion I hadn't seen from her in years. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the exchange. The name on the other end was unfamiliar, Darren. He wasn't just another name in her contact list. He was someone who knew her in ways I thought only I did. Every word I read was a betrayal, every sentence a dagger. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was actively building a life with someone else behind my back. One line, in particular, made my blood run cold. "I wish I didn't have to hide this from him anymore. Being with you feels like coming home." The laptop snapped shut as I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The woman I loved, the woman I supported through every step of her career, had shattered my trust. I didn't know what I would do, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let this betrayal go unanswered. The hours after my discovery passed in a haze. My hands still shook as I poured myself a drink and slumped onto the couch. I stared blankly at the muted TV, replaying the words from her emails over and over. Each phrase felt like a punch to the gut. I needed clarity, evidence, something to confirm what I already knew but didn't want to accept. It wasn't just about confronting Jenna. It was about understanding how deep the betrayal went. Was this a fling? A mistake? Or had my marriage been a facade for months, maybe years? The next day, I tried to act normal. Jenna was due back from her trip, and I didn't want to tip her off. I forced myself to follow the motions, finishing an article for a client, taking a walk to clear my head, even grabbing groceries to make dinner. The mundanity of it all was suffocating, but I clung to it like a lifeline. That evening, her car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as she stepped out, her suitcase in tow. She looked radiant, as if the trip had rejuvenated her. But all I could see was the woman who had written those words to another man. "Hey, babe." She greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek. Her smile was as bright as ever, but now it felt rehearsed. I played my part, plastering on a smile and asking about her trip. "Exhausting," she said, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Meetings all day, clients who couldn't make up their minds. It was a nightmare." "I'm just glad to be home." I nodded, keeping my voice even. "I made lasagna for dinner. Figured you'd want something hearty after a long trip." Her face lit up. "You're the best," she said, leaning in for another kiss. It stung. Every affectionate word, every small gesture she made, felt like mockery. But I didn't let it show. Not yet. That night, as she showered, I checked her phone. It was locked, of course, but I'd seen her input her passcode countless times. I punched it in, my heart hammering in my chest. The screen unlocked, and I quickly navigated to her messages. The conversation with Darren was there, just like the emails on her laptop. This time, I scrolled back further, uncovering months of exchanges. There were photos too, selfies of her smiling in hotel rooms, wearing outfits I'd never seen before. She called him things like baby and love, words she used to reserve for me. One message stopped me cold. I'll tell him soon. I can't keep lying forever. He deserves to know. Tell me soon? My mind reeled. Was she planning to end things with him? Or was this the prelude to the inevitable conversation where she would leave me? I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the screen. The sound of the shower turning off jolted me into action. I quickly locked the phone and placed it back on the nightstand, then returned to the living room, feigning interest in the show playing on TV. Jenna joined me a few minutes later, her hair damp and her face free of makeup. She looked so natural, so familiar, that for a fleeting moment, I wanted to believe everything was fine, that this was just a bad dream, and I'd wake up to find my marriage intact. But it wasn't a dream. It was a carefully crafted lie, and I was living in its shadow. As she curled up next to me on the couch, I wrapped an arm around her, forcing myself to hold her close. I needed her to feel secure, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. For now, I would wait, gather more evidence, prepare myself for what came next. Because when I confronted her, I wasn't just going to ask for answers. I was going to make her regret every moment of her betrayal. The days that followed were torturous. I kept Jenna's secret, but every interaction with her felt like walking on broken glass. I'd catch her glancing at her phone, smiling at messages I knew weren't from me. She started going out more, citing work dinners and last-minute meetings. Each time, I forced myself to smile and wave her off, even as my chest burned with suspicion. I became obsessed with finding the truth. Her laptop, her phone, her receipts. Anything that could give me insight into the life she was living behind my back. I wasn't just looking for evidence. I was trying to understand the woman I thought I knew. The deeper I dug, the more horrifying it became. Jenna wasn't just seeing Darren. She had woven a web of lies so intricate that I wondered how she kept it all straight. There were credit card charges for dinners at expensive restaurants I'd never been to, hotel stays that didn't align with her business trips, a second email account filled with correspondence not just with Darren, but with other men as well. It wasn't just infidelity, it was a double life. One evening, as I sifted through the photos on her laptop, I found a folder labeled Work Projects. It seemed innocuous, but something about it felt off. Inside were dozens of photos. Her and Darren at a beach resort, smiling and holding cocktails. The two of them at a candlelit dinner. A blurry photo of them in a hotel room, their faces close as they laughed at something unseen. It wasn't the images themselves that destroyed me. It was the timestamps. These weren't from years ago, or even months ago. Some were as recent as last week, during the trip she had supposedly spent in client meetings. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop. I couldn't focus, couldn't think. Every time I looked at Jenna, I saw her smiling in those photos, her laughter meant for someone else. I wanted to confront her, to scream at her, to demand answers. But I knew I wasn't ready. Instead, I decided to follow her. The next time she announced she had a late meeting, I offered to drive her. She declined, of course, flashing me an apologetic smile as she explained that she might be back late and didn't want me waiting up. My stomach churned as I watched her leave, her high heels clicking against the pavement. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. I had downloaded a GPS tracking app onto her phone earlier that week. It wasn't something I was proud of, but at this point, pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. The app led me to an upscale restaurant downtown. From the car, I watched as Jenna stepped out, dressed in a sleek black dress I didn't recognize. She greeted a man waiting by the entrance, Darren. He placed a hand on her lower back, guiding her inside. I stayed parked outside, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. Watching them together was like staring into the sun. I couldn't look away, even as it burned me. They laughed, leaned close, whispered things I could only imagine. I felt like an intruder in my own life, a spectator to the destruction of everything I held dear. When they finally left, I followed them to a nearby hotel. I sat in my car as they entered, his hand entwined with hers. That night, I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly for hours, my thoughts racing. The betrayal wasn't just a hypothetical anymore. It was real, tangible, and devastating. Jenna wasn't just my wife. She was the person I trusted most in the world. And now, that trust was gone. When I finally returned home, it was past midnight. Jenna was already in bed, her breathing slow and steady. I stood in the doorway, staring at her peaceful face, torn between rage and heartbreak. This wasn't just her betrayal. It was my failure. I had let this happen, ignored the signs, convinced myself that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It was shattered. And I was going to make sure Jenna felt every piece of it. The morning after I watched Jenna walk into that hotel, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. This wasn't just about her affair anymore. This was about taking control of a situation that had spiraled beyond anything I could have imagined. As Jenna went about her morning routine, humming softly while making coffee, I sat across from her at the dining table, watching. She didn't notice the weight of my gaze or the storm brewing behind my calm exterior. I wanted to say something, to throw the evidence in her face and watch her crumble, but I knew it wasn't time yet. Instead, I asked, "How was your meeting last night?" She glanced at me, her smile unfaltering. "Good. Long, but productive. You know how it is." "Oh, absolutely," I replied, my voice even. "I'm glad you're making progress. You've been working so hard lately." Her eyes flickered briefly, but she recovered quickly. "It's just a busy season. You know how demanding clients can be." I nodded, fighting back the urge to call her out. Let her keep lying, I thought. It only makes what's coming next more satisfying. That afternoon, while Jenna was out running errands, I began piecing together my plan. The photos, the emails, the hotel reservations. I compiled everything into a single folder on my laptop, backing it up on a USB drive. I even recorded a voice memo detailing what I had discovered, just in case I needed to explain everything to someone later. But I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was preparing my counterstrike. First, I contacted a private investigator. If I was going to confront Jenna, I needed undeniable proof, the kind that wouldn't allow her to spin the story or cast doubt on my claims. The investigator was professional, discreet, and surprisingly sympathetic. "You're not the first client in this position," he assured me, "and you won't be the last." I gave him Darren's name and the dates of their supposed business trips. He promised to dig deeper, to find connections and uncover what I might have missed. Next, I met with a lawyer. I had never thought about divorce before, not seriously anyway, but now it felt like a lifeline. I needed to know my rights, to protect myself from whatever fallout Jenna might try to create. The lawyer listened intently as I laid out the situation, nodding at all the right moments. "With the evidence you have, this is a strong case," she said. "But it's crucial you don't confront her until everything is finalized. Premature action could jeopardize your position." Her words made sense, but they also ignited something inside me. A desire not just to end this, but to make Jenna understand the depth of her betrayal. That evening, Jenna returned home with takeout, her smile bright as she unpacked the containers. "Thought we could have a low-key night," she said, setting the table. "You've been working so hard lately, and I wanted to do something nice." I almost laughed at the irony. Here she was, playing the role of the doting wife, all while her lover was likely texting her from the safety of his own home. But I played along, feigning gratitude as we ate in silence. Later, as we sat on the couch, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it quickly, her expression neutral, before setting it face down on the coffee table. I watched her closely, noting the faint tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. "Everything okay?" I asked casually. "Yeah," she said too quickly. "Just work stuff." I leaned back, hiding my smirk. "You work so hard, Jenna. I don't know how you manage it all." She smiled faintly, but I could see the guilt flickering behind her eyes. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. The pieces were coming together, and soon, the picture would be complete. Jenna thought she had everything under control, that her lies were safe and her double life untouchable. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. By the time I was done, she wouldn't just regret what she'd done. She would wish she had never met Darren in the first place. The following days were a delicate dance. Jenna carried on as if nothing was wrong, oblivious to the storm brewing right under her nose. I kept playing the part of the loving husband, masking my anger with a calm exterior. But inside, I was a ticking time bomb, counting down to the moment I'd detonate her world. The private investigator worked faster than I anticipated. By the end of the week, he handed me a file containing more than I could have hoped for. Photographs of Jenna and Darren entering and leaving hotels, timestamps matching the dates of her so-called business trips, and even receipts for lavish dinners charged to a corporate card I knew wasn't hers. Darren, it seemed, had more to lose than I initially thought. A wife and 2 kids, along with a prominent position at his firm. Are you planning to use this against her or him? The investigator asked when he handed me the evidence. Both, I replied, my voice cold. She doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed, and neither does he. That weekend, I set the first part of my plan into motion. Jenna mentioned she was meeting some co-workers for drinks, and I smiled, playing the supportive husband. Have fun, I told her as she left, pressing a kiss to her cheek. She didn't notice the faint tension in my grip or the way my eyes lingered on her retreating figure. Once she was gone, I accessed her laptop. I knew the password by heart, her mother's maiden name, combined with her birth year. Within minutes, I had opened her email and forwarded key exchanges to my private account. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was ensuring she had no way to spin the narrative when the time came. Then, I made the call. Darren's wife, Emily, answered on the second ring. Hello? Emily, my name is Matt, I began, my voice steady. We've never met, but I think you deserve to know what your husband has been doing. There was a pause. What are you talking about? I have proof, I said. Photos, messages, receipts. Darren's been having an affair with my wife, Jenna. Her sharp intake of breath confirmed what I already suspected. She hadn't known. Are you sure? She whispered. Positive. I can send you everything I have if you'd like. The line was silent for a long moment before she spoke again, her voice trembling. Please do. After hanging up, I sent her a detailed email, attaching every damning piece of evidence the investigator had uncovered. I imagined her sitting there, staring at the screen, her world collapsing just as mine had. A small, vindictive part of me found satisfaction in that. Later that night, when Jenna returned home, she was glowing, her laughter ringing through the house as if nothing had changed. She greeted me with a kiss, her perfume lingering in the air as she recounted her night out with friends. I nodded along, barely listening, my mind already racing ahead to the next move. As she disappeared into the bathroom to shower, her phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen, my heart pounding as Darren's name appeared. Darren, Emily knows. She's furious. What did you say? I smiled to myself. The cracks were forming, and it wouldn't be long before the entire facade came crashing down. Jenna emerged from the bathroom, her hair damp and her smile radiant. What are you grinning about? She asked playfully. Oh, nothing, I replied, my voice light. Just thinking about how lucky I am. If only she knew. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, I lay awake, feeling the weight of the secrets I carried. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The first blow had been struck, but the real devastation was still to come. And when it did, Jenna wouldn't know what hit her. The aftermath of my call to Emily was almost immediate. By Monday morning, Darren's perfect life began to unravel. I received a text from the private investigator with a link to a local gossip column. It detailed the scandal of a high-ranking executive at Darren's firm being caught in an affair. While the article didn't explicitly name him, the details were damning enough for anyone in his circle to connect the dots. At breakfast, Jenna seemed unusually distracted, her phone buzzing incessantly with messages. She barely touched her coffee, her smile forced when I asked if everything was okay. Work drama, she muttered, brushing off my concern. It's nothing. I nodded, pretending to accept her excuse, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Something had shifted, and she knew it. She just didn't know how much yet. Later that day, While she was out running errands, I received an email from Emily. Her response was as raw and heartbreaking as I expected. Emily, Matt, thank you for reaching out. I've confronted Darren, and he admitted everything. He claims it was just a fling, but I know better. I don't know what to do right now, but I'm grateful for the truth. Please keep me updated if you learn anything else. Reading her words stirred something in me. Sympathy, anger, and an unshakable resolve to see this through. I replied briefly, letting her know I would keep her in the loop. Darren had brought this on himself, and I had no intention of letting him off the hook. That evening, Jenna came home later than usual, her face pale and her expression tight. She barely looked at me as she walked in, dropping her bag by the door and heading straight for the kitchen. Everything okay? I asked, following her. Just tired, she said, her voice clipped. Work's been stressful. Anything I can help with? She shook her head, avoiding my gaze. No, it's fine. I just need to rest. The cracks in her facade were growing, and I could feel the tension building between us like a taut wire ready to snap. Later, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I saw the moment it hit her. Her expression froze, her face draining of color. She locked her phone and stood abruptly, muttering something about needing air before slipping out the front door. I waited a few moments, then checked her phone, which she had left on the coffee table in her haste. The notification on the lock screen was from Darren. Darren, they're talking about us at work. Emily's telling everyone. What did you do? The satisfaction I felt was fleeting, overshadowed by the weight of what was to come. Jenna returned a short while later, her composure barely intact. Everything okay? I asked as she slipped off her shoes. She nodded stiffly. Just needed a walk. I let her retreat to the bedroom, knowing she was teetering on the edge. The next phase of my plan was already in motion, and it was only a matter of time before her carefully constructed world crumbled entirely. That night, as she slept fitfully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. She thought she could control this, that she could lie her way out of it. But she didn't understand the depth of her betrayal or the lengths I was willing to go to ensure she felt every ounce of the pain she had caused. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, and my future. The end was coming, and Jenna wouldn't be prepared for it. By the middle of the week, the tension in our house was palpable. Jenna was unraveling. She spent most of her time on her phone, pacing the living room or retreating to the bedroom for work calls. She jumped at every buzz and notification, her once steady confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. It was a stark contrast to the woman who had so effortlessly maintained her web of lies just days ago. I waited for the right moment. Confronting her was inevitable, but I wanted her to stew in her guilt and fear for a little longer. She had to feel the cracks beneath her feet before I delivered the final blow. On Friday evening, I finally decided it was time. Jenna came home from work looking more haggard than I'd ever seen her. She dropped her bag by the door and immediately poured herself a glass of wine, barely acknowledging me. I let her settle in, watching as she sank into the couch, her shoulders slumped. Rough week? I asked, taking a seat across from her. She glanced at me, her eyes guarded. You could say that. Work's been insane. Anything I can help with? She shook her head, her voice tight. No, just a lot on my plate. For a moment, I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us. Then I leaned forward, my tone casual but deliberate. Jenna, is there something you want to tell me? Her wineglass froze halfway to her lips. She set it down slowly, avoiding my gaze. What do you mean? You've been distant lately, I said, my voice deceptively calm. Distracted. I can't help but feel like there's something you're not telling me. She forced a laugh, the sound hollow. Matt, you're overthinking. It's just work stress. You know how demanding my job is. I nodded, pretending to consider her words. Right. Work stress. That must explain the hotel stays, the dinners with Darren, and the fact that his wife knows everything. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? You heard me, I said, my voice cold now. I know, Jenna. About Darren. About the hotels. About everything. She stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief and panic. Matt, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence, I snapped, my composure slipping for the first time. I've seen the emails, the photos, the texts. I know you've been lying to me for months, maybe longer. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time, Jenna looked small, vulnerable. I thought I would feel satisfaction seeing her like this, but all I felt was anger. Why, Jenna? I demanded. Why would you do this? Was I not enough for you? Did you think I wouldn't find out? She covered her face with her hands, her voice muffled. I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen? I repeated, my voice rising. You didn't mean to book hotel rooms and lie to my face? You didn't mean to throw away our marriage for some pathetic fling? It wasn't just a fling, she cried, her voice breaking. I care about him. Her words hit me like a physical blow. You care about him, I repeated bitterly. And what about me, Jenna? What about the life we built together? Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. You don't understand, she sobbed. I've been so unhappy. Unhappy? I interrupted, my voice shaking with rage. And instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to destroy everything we had? She had no response, her sobs filling the silence. I stood, pacing the room, trying to rein in my fury. This is what's going to happen, I said finally, my tone ice cold. We're done, Jenna. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be served with divorce papers next week. And Darren? His wife knows everything. He's going to lose everything too. Her head shot up, her face pale. You told Emily? I told her, I confirmed. She deserved to know the truth, just like I did. Matt, please, she begged, her voice trembling. We can fix this. I made a mistake. No, I said sharply. You didn't just make a mistake, Jenna. You made a choice, over and over again, and now you have to live with it. I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing on the couch. As I climbed the stairs to the guest room, I felt a strange sense of relief. The confrontation was over, and the weight of her lies had been lifted from my shoulders. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. I still had more to do. Because Jenna wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. Not if I had anything to say about it. The weekend after our confrontation was a blur of tension and silence. Jenna tried to talk to me several times, her words full of apologies and pleas for another chance. But I had nothing left to give her. Every word she spoke felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of how deeply she had betrayed me. I moved into the guest room that night, the physical distance mirroring the emotional chasm between us. It felt surreal. This woman I had built a life with was now a stranger, someone I could barely stand to look at. On Monday morning, the real fallout began. The first message came early. Jenna's phone buzzed relentlessly as I sipped my coffee at the kitchen counter. She ignored the notifications at first, her eyes red and puffy from another sleepless night. But when the call started, she couldn't avoid it any longer. She picked up her phone, her voice tense. Hello? I watched as her expression shifted from confusion to panic. What? No, that's not true. Who told you that? She darted out of the room, but her voice carried down the hall. Please, you have to believe me. It's not what it looks like. I smirked to myself, knowing exactly what was happening. The email I'd sent to Darren's company had done its job. Detailed accounts of his affair with Jenna, complete with photos and receipts, were now circulating among his colleagues. His pristine reputation was crumbling, and Jenna's name was being dragged down with his. A few hours later, she stormed back into the kitchen, her face pale and her hands trembling. Did you do this? She demanded, holding up her phone. Did you send that email to Darren's office? I looked up from my laptop, feigning innocence. What email? Don't play dumb, she shouted, her voice cracking. They know, Matt. Everyone knows. Darren might lose his job because of this. And why should I care? I replied coldly. You didn't care about me when you were sneaking around with him. Why should I care about his career? Her jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But she said nothing, her shoulders slumping as she collapsed into a chair. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." "That's the thing, Jenna," I said, leaning forward. "You didn't care who you hurt. You only cared about yourself. And now, you're facing the consequences." By midweek, the situation had escalated further. Darren's wife, Emily, wasn't content with letting the affair ruin their personal lives. She wanted professional consequences as well. She contacted the HR department at Darren's firm, citing the company's strict no-fraternization policy. Within hours, Darren was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Jenna, too, faced repercussions at her job. A close colleague of Darren's leaked details of their affair to her boss, and whispers began circulating through her office. She came home that evening visibly shaken, her hands trembling as she poured herself a glass of wine. "They called me in for a meeting today," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. They're reviewing my position." I shrugged, offering no sympathy. "Actions have consequences, Jenna. Maybe you should have thought about that before you threw our marriage away." She didn't respond, staring into her glass as if it held the answers to her problems. For the first time, she seemed to truly grasp the magnitude of what she had done, not just to me, but to herself. By Friday, the cracks in Jenna's carefully curated life had widened into chasms. Darren's wife filed for divorce, citing adultery, and the news quickly spread through their social circles. Jenna became a pariah at work, her once friendly colleagues avoiding her like the plague. Even her closest friends started distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. And yet, she still tried to salvage what remained of our marriage. She cornered me that night, her voice desperate and her eyes pleading. "Matt, please," she said, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. "We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything." I pulled my hands away, shaking my head. "It's too late, Jenna. You destroyed everything we built together. There's no going back." Her tears fell freely, but they did nothing to soften my resolve. I had given her my love, my trust, my life, and she had thrown it all away. "You should start packing," I said coldly. "The papers will be here next week. I want you out of the house by then." She crumpled onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. But I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a hollow sense of closure. The fallout was complete. Jenna's world was in ruins, and mine was finally free of the lies that had poisoned it. But I wasn't done yet. Not entirely. One final act remained, the ultimate symbol of her betrayal and my freedom. The weekend passed in a blur, and Jenna retreated into herself. She barely spoke. Her phone lay untouched on the counter, and she spent most of her time locked in the guest room. I thought the fallout was over, that she had nothing left to hide. But on Sunday afternoon, as I sorted through the shared accounts and finances we'd need to divide, I stumbled upon something that reignited my fury. There was a hidden bank account. The statement was buried in a pile of old documents Jenna had carelessly left in a drawer. It showed regular deposits, small amounts, just enough to avoid suspicion. But the withdrawals told the real story. Hotel charges, lavish dinners, and gifts. Darren's name appeared in several payment memos. This wasn't just an affair. It was a lifestyle she had been funding with our money. I confronted her immediately. Bursting into the guest room, I threw the statement onto the bed. "Care to explain this?" Jenna's face went pale as she glanced at the papers. "Matt, I can explain." "Explain?" I shouted, my composure finally breaking. "You've been stealing from me, from us, to fund your little affair?" "I wasn't stealing," she cried, her voice desperate. I didn't know how else to cover the costs without you noticing." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "You didn't want me to notice? Well, guess what, Jenna? I noticed. And now, I'm taking everything." The next morning, I met with my lawyer again, handing over the financial statements. "This is more than enough to prove financial misconduct," she said, flipping through the pages. "This could work in your favor for both the divorce settlement and property division." That was all I needed to hear. Jenna was served with the divorce papers that afternoon. The look on her face when she opened the envelope was a mix of shock and resignation. You really went through with it, she murmured. I warned you, I said coldly. This is what happens when you destroy someone's trust. In the weeks that followed, Jenna's life continued to crumble. Her workplace let her go, citing the scandal as a distraction to the team. Darren's firing became official, and Emily won sole custody of their kids. Jenna moved out of our home, taking only a few belongings with her. But I wasn't done yet. I posted the evidence online. Carefully anonymized, of course, but detailed enough that everyone in our social circle could connect the dots. Photos, emails, financial records, it was all there. The fallout was immediate. Friends and family who had once adored Jenna turned their backs on her. She became the subject of whispers and judgment wherever she went. Darren's name became synonymous with disgrace in professional circles. Jenna called me, screaming, accusing me of ruining her life. You did this to yourself? I replied before hanging up. With Jenna out of the house, I began to rebuild. I redecorated, removing every trace of her. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during our marriage, leaning on them for support. For the first time in years, I felt free. But there was still one loose end. The hidden bank account. My lawyer filed a motion to recover the funds Jenna had taken. With the evidence of financial misconduct, the court ruled in my favor. She was ordered to repay every cent. Jenna called, pleading with me to reconsider. I have nothing left, she sobbed. You should have thought about that before, I replied. Hanging up, months passed. The divorce was finalized, and the house was officially mine. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but with hope. Jenna, meanwhile, disappeared from my life entirely. The last I heard, she was living in a tiny apartment, working a low-paying job, and trying to piece together the remnants of her life. Darren, too, faded into obscurity, his career in ruins. One evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset, a glass of wine in hand. The pain of Jenna's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer consumed me. I had survived. I wasn't the same man I had been before the affair. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined to value myself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the beginning of my freedom. And for the first time in years, I felt whole.